So welcome, people. Welcome to the Alef Trust. My name is Ellis Linders. I am core faculty and student experience coordinator at the Alef Trust. And I'm here today to introduce Dr. Glenn Hartelius, who is going to be running a certificate course with us. We're very happy about that. So I'll be running the Zoom session in the background. So introducing Dr. Glenn Hartelius. He is a leading voice in the field of transpersonal psychology, and through his various contributions has helped to significantly advance the field during the last few decades. Aside from being a leader in the field of transpersonal psychology and integral psychology, he's a psychology researcher. He's an award-winning scholar. He received the prestigious Abraham Maslow Award from the American Psychological Association in 2023. He is editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies, which is the largest and most influential scientific journal in the field. He is co-author of the Ketamine Papers, co-editor of the Wiley-Blackwell Handbook of Transpersonal Psychology, which provides, it's actually its second edition now is coming out, isn't it? Provides the most comprehensive scholarly review, up-to-date overview of the transpersonal field. His experience includes 15 years of teaching at university level and building and leading a doctoral program in psychology. So he's a busy man. So we're really happy at the Alef Trust that Glenn is offering his course on for presence, power, and inner poise in life and leadership. This course is based on his cutting-edge research in states of consciousness and embodiment. So Glenn will present the certificate course today. And after that, there will be some time for questions and answers. If you have a question in the meantime, just put it in the chat and I'll try and keep an eye on that. So you can open your webcams. As I said, we are recording this session, so just be aware of that. And this is also gives you a bit of a taster of how these sessions are usually run. Yeah, they're run on Zoom. So I'm going to hand over to Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellis.
Okay.
So welcome, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about the background of my work and sort of an outline of this course. I started my interest in what I later came to know as transpersonal psychology at a fairly early age, because to me I was just fascinated by sort of like the spiritual stories of healing and wondrous phenomena, and I wasn't interested in just reading about them. I wanted to understand, and I wanted to know how does that really work? It's fine to have inspiring stories, but if they're just stories, what good is that? And it's been a long journey. Along the way, I got a master's degree in religious studies. Discovered that they didn't really know either. Then I came to the transpersonal area of psychology. And the thing that caught my attention along the way was that when people have these types of experiences or open these types of capacities, there's usually it's around an individual, and it seems to be about a shift in state of consciousness. That's a term that we typically use, even though state of consciousness kind of is difficult to describe because there's so many different definitions of consciousness. And yet, in some ways, it is the states of consciousness that give us the notion of consciousness. Sort of, it is the most direct manifestation, if you will, of what we think of as consciousness. So for me, I set about, rather than, I spent some time sort of in the sort of field of consciousness studies, reading and exploring that route. And I felt that the more practical route was to, if we could figure out how to measure states of consciousness. Um, in an earlier study that I did with some colleagues, we found that something upward of 90%, 85 to 90% of all papers published in the first 40 years of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology um, had some reference, some meaningful reference to states of consciousness. So not only in my own inquiries, but also in the transpersonal area, states of consciousness seems to be quite central. In fact, I would argue that it is sort of the linchpin of what makes a transpersonal approach or an integral approach different. How do I mean that? I mean that in conventional cognitive, behavioral, neuroscientific approaches to psychology, to personal development, there is sort of an assumption that the ordinary waking state, the rational waking state, is the right one, is the one through which we perceive reality, and that all other states are in some ways distortions, that they somehow blur what is actually going on. And if somebody has an experience in those states, we need to rush over and explain it quickly in the rational thinking state, because that's the real one. And of course, one of the reasons that that is the case is because there hasn't been an ability to really explain what happens cognitively or otherwise when people shift to other states that, from a spiritual perspective or a transpersonal perspective, we would consider to be useful states. States such as meditation or intuition or reverie or awe, states in which sometimes people have experiences that frankly change their lives, change the direction of their lives. And yet, within a conventional approach to psychology, these are either some sort of um, delusion or some sort of social construction, as opposed to something that actually happens. And if you go to our, uh, you know, there's a lot of very good information and very good research in psychology, and yet the only states that are recognized are waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Everything else is considered to be just a social construction. So the work that I've been doing for the past number of years has focused on developing a way to uh, measure, describe, and teach and attain shifts in one's own state. That is the ability to choose one's state when you want to. This work has led to, we've been able to get a little bit of grant funding. We're applying for more right now, but has developed into several publications. We've been able to use neuroscientific methods to study it and demonstrate that, in fact, the approaches that we're using, by changing in the sense of where you sit within yourself, you can both change your state of consciousness and you can directly change the pattern of brain activation. So, and this is, uh, we say this is a bit ahead of the curve because there was a paper that just came out this year showing from a meta-analysis, which is kind of a study of studies, that if you think that you can just stick EEG on people's heads, measure what's going on, and from there figure out what's happening with meditation. Um, there's the disappointing fact that EEG studies have not been able to distinguish between the two major forms of meditation in Buddhism, one of which is shamatha, which is a focused meditation, and one of is vipassana, which is kind of like the more familiar form. For example, vipassana is the tradition in which John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction is conducted. So the workshop, this certificate program, is based on the methods that we have used in this research to be able to give people an actual step-by-step process that we have been able to demonstrate both with EEG, and we've just completed an outcome study where we showed that people who are meditation novices with a very short training and a 10-minute practice session were able to achieve the same decreased levels of stress and increased levels of mindfulness as people who had been meditating for years. So in that sense, it is a very rapid and precise way to be able to shift states. But this is not just for meditation, because for me, meditation is, it's a specific application, but the bigger project here is how do we manage our states? How do we self-regulate to get where we want to go for what we need to do? Now, in an Indian spiritual context, for example, one does meditation for um, for insight, to advance spiritually, and yet being able that that is within a particular cultural setting, um, and that is one of the reasons that traditional approaches to, let's say, meditation, um, typically can take weeks or months to learn. Why? Because the tradition didn't require any precision. If you were living in Asia 200 years ago and you said to yourself, you know what, I want to learn mindfulness, you wouldn't go down and sign up for a class on Tuesday nights. You would be asked to give up your life, your fields, your business, your family, your community, and move to a village where there was a teacher, and that would now be your life, and you would be immersed uh, essentially in a community that was involved in that type of practice. And so you wouldn't need, because you were immersed in it, you wouldn't need very precise instructions. You could just listen to the words of the teacher on occasion, and the rest of the time you were with people who were mindfully working the fields, or mindfully preparing the food, or mindfully washing the floors, whatever it was. And that was your way of life. That's a little more inconvenient now. Um, most of us have very busy lives with many different working pieces. And so if we want to learn these things, using induction techniques that were designed for life in an immersion community are not as useful, not as effective, because we don't have as much time to devote to them. So the processes that we've developed are better suited for the kinds of lives that we need to live in this era of the world. And of course, we have more to do than just meditate. We also need to know how to focus quietly, how to concentrate, how to drop in and be able to find absorption and really absorb information, stay with complex tasks, uh, how to create rapport, connection with other people, how to um, how to use those state shifting abilities to do better the things that we already need to do. So attention strategies is not just about meditation. That is one of the reasons we began with that research, is because that's something people understand in terms of, oh yes, that's a state shift. We understand that there is a change in the relationship with others and reality in meditation. And yet there is also a change in a quietly focused mind that we use for productivity. There is a change in a state of internal quieting, just to be able to hold one's self in the midst of a stressful situation. There is a change when we sit down with someone to have a conversation and connect with them. Uh, some of you may be involved in coaching, either uh, doing coaching or having a coach, and or psychotherapy. You know that there's a difference in the quality of the person. Some of you have probably had the experience. You have something you want to talk about with someone. You want to. You just need someone to hear you, and you connect with a friend. Say, hey, let's meet for tea. And you go and you sit down, and it's like, no, the person that's with me is not in a state where I can say this. Oh, I thought you wanted to talk about this. No, no, no. It's really fine. I'm fine. And other times you may sit down with a perfect stranger, and because of the quality of presence, suddenly you find them, you're telling them your life story. You're telling them what's really going on. So these qualities of presence, these states of consciousness are something that we use practically all the time, because we're always in some state of consciousness. So being able to regulate that intentionally is the difference between walking into a situation and hoping that the right state is going to show up, and knowing exactly how to navigate to the state that you need. Whether it is, oh, I need to do some reading for comprehension now, or I need to hold a strong sense of presence because I'm going to be around a number of children and they need to have someone who is holding ground, whether it is connecting with someone, whether it is, okay, you know what, I need to spend some time in internal space and in meditation, whatever that is, when you have the tools, first to know how to self regulate, and then where you go for each of these different states. That is a tool that is very practical for everyday life, not just for the time that you might spend in meditation. I had I was teaching a psychology course in over in Oakland, which is a fairly diverse and city, and has some. This particular um, city college was in a close to in the low income neighborhood. There was, you know, some students there whose parents had never gone to college. They were the first, and in the course of giving the first lecture, I finished and I said, well, read pages so and so and be prepared to for a quiz when you come back. And one of the kids, without raising his hand, just shouted out into the room, "How are we supposed to do that?" And I realized that what he was telling me was that he had gotten all the way to uh, junior college without anybody actually being able to teach him how to focus, how to read for comprehension. And so I said, "Well, why don't you stay afterwards?" And when you teach at a junior college, you don't really have your own, when you adjunct, you don't have your own office. You just, find one somewhere and use it. So I took him up to an office and took the textbook, and I showed him how to shift his internal state into a state of mental focus. I opened the textbook, I pointed to a paragraph. I said, using this state, why don't you read that paragraph? He read the paragraph, and then he said, "Oh," and that was it. I said, "Well, okay, we'll see you next class." I said, "Well, I hope he's coming back." Um, he came back, uh, did fine on the quiz, got a B plus in the class. And what struck me was how little our psychology knows about how to self regulate our state of consciousness. That we can tell students, pay attention, focus, but we can't tell them how. So, self regulation of our attentional states is an area where there is much work to be done. Uh, and what I'm sharing with you in this certificate course is both the evidence and the processes of how to self regulate in a much more precise way. I'm going to share a couple of slides here. Um, it's not it. Come on. There we go. So in this course, we're going to be looking at the structures, the the the, the way that consciousness shows up in the body, that attention shows up in the body. Using attention as kind of like the direct manifestation, the direct experience of consciousness. We obviously know from biology classes that there's different organs and tissues with specific functions, locations in the body. But this is also true of attention. So, for example, when we are in an ordinary thinking state, our attention, our sense of self, our sense of where the information is arriving and where we are observing from is in the head. But we are going to be looking at these other kinds of states that are more associated with self locations in the body. If you ask the question, what's attention? Psychology comes up with a ready answer. Oh, it's when you concentrate on one part of the environment and you ignore everything else. But if we ask where attention is, most of the time, if somebody will answer you, they'll tell you what their attention is pointed at. But attention isn't just pointed at things, it is also pointed from somewhere in the body. And in the kinds of cultures that most of us live in, that attention usually comes from the head. So when we talk about moving attention into other parts of the body, that doesn't mean just sitting in the head and pointing the attention down. Um, I've, I've heard that sort of instruction many times in workshops, which is bring your attention to your body. And people are sitting in their heads and they're like directing their attention down to the body. What we're looking at here, what we teach here, is how to actually change where the attending you is sitting in your experience. And then how to deploy that in multiple different ways to enhance the skills to both develop and enhance skills that you have for presence, for personal connection, for effectiveness, for relaxation and recharge, for accessing creativity and intuition, for enhancing mental focus and clarity. In the course, there are 7 modules, and with each module, there is both the the recorded lecture portion, and then most importantly, a live session where, and there's also reading material, some fairly accessible reading material, and also some um, scientific scholarly papers for those of you who are interested in that information as well. But in that session, they're working with you on, and also recorded exercises, working with each person to make sure that the exercise is something that you're able to do. Because um, it's fine to, read something, get the idea, get a recorded exercise and try it out. But what if it doesn't work? What if there's some little piece that isn't uh, isn't clicking for you? And so, um, having taught this for many years now, I'm able to take that opportunity to guide each person and help you overcome the blocks so that you end up with a clear experience of how to bring yourself to a different state and exactly how you got there. So that's a very important part of these, so that you have adequate time to read, you have adequate opportunity to ask questions and get direct assistance, and you have um, the time to practice, so that the questions that you may have arise during the course. So I'd like to, at this point, just open the floor to any questions that you may have about the work behind this certificate course, about the structure, process of the course.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Glenn, for giving that introductory talk. It feels very interesting. My question is, how much time would this require? Because I've got quite a few things going on. So that would be my only concern, really.
Sure. What we do in this certificate program is we break it down to simple steps in the process. And typically, I would think that it shouldn't take more than an hour to both read the material, do the practices. So an hour between, for each module. There's the recorded lectures are around 15 minutes. So if you listened to the lecture, did the exercise once or twice, read the material, probably an hour a week, something like that, would give you.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Monica.
Hi. I was just curious if this is open, if this is exclusively for the Alef wider community, or if you're inviting other people in from other areas internationally.
The circulation is, the advertisement goes out mainly to the Alef Trust community. and people who are acquainted with it. So I mean, there isn't a sort of a large, publicity campaign around it. So it's likely to be mostly people in the Alef Trust community, or people who know someone in that community, who are going to be hearing about it.
Great, thank you.
It's certainly not limited. It's just a matter of sort of where the word goes out.
Thanks.
Unless I think we got someone else in the waiting room. So, any other questions about any aspect of this process? Wild.
Hi there. Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I had, I guess, two questions. First would be in practicing these techniques, have you found any way in which I guess, the results can be measured? Like obviously it's an experiential process, but I just wondered if there's ways to measure to see, when you are and aren't in these states.
We have been able to measure it with EEG. And of course, that's not something that each of you would be able to do. So are you asking kind of like, how would you be able to know when you were there?
Yeah, I guess so. There seems like heart rate variability. I just wondered if there was anything that you had experimented with, or people that have been in the program had been able to measure for themselves.
Yeah, what I find is that when we do the live sessions, I mean, I'm able to assess where someone is sitting in terms of their attentional stance. And so if someone's not quite there, I'm able to guide them and say, a little bit more here, a little more of that, try this. And once people drop into the experience, it's really quite noticeable. So just in terms of, which is one of the reasons it's fairly practical, because if you wonder whether you're there, you're not. Once you're there, you go, oh, yes, yeah, this is it. And in part because you're not thinking, am I there anymore? You're simply in a state where it's much quieter. And for me, one of the benefits is just that reliability. I think, people who study a traditional meditation practice, I think it's wonderful. I would recommend have anyone to take mindfulness-based stress reduction or any other sort of traditionally based training. But I had a gentleman once I was doing some work with, and he said, I've been meditating for 30 years. I said, oh, well, that's wonderful. How is that for you? He said, well, you know how it is. It's really hard to quiet your thinking mind. I said, no, actually it isn't. And I showed him in a few minutes, and of course, because of his experience, he was able to get it very quickly. And so it's like, to me, one of the benefits of having something that is a reliable pathway to achieving that quiet state is that then, if you're practicing for many years, you actually know that you're getting there, as opposed to having followed instructions. And this is one of the problems with the challenges with measurement in meditation research. That is, if you give people verbal instructions, you don't know what they're doing internally. These instructions show you exactly what to do internally, which is the reason that we've been able to get such consistent results with when we have been testing it in a controlled condition. We're able to, people very consistently get to a greatly reduced stress and increased mindfulness. So, no, we haven't seen anybody do HRV. but we have tested it with self-report measures, we have tested it with EEG. And my experience is when people find that state, it's quite clear.
Thank you.
Again, that's practical because internal sensation is something that you have with you all the time. You might leave your HRV finger device, whatever, at home, but you always have your internal sensation. And the goal here is not just to teach you a meditation skill, but to teach you self-regulation so that you have a clear connection. What is the internal sensation that I use? How do I move that internal sensation from one location within myself, within the space of my body, to another? What locations do I use when I want a particular outcome? When I want to have reduced stress, when I want to be mindful, when I want to be focused, when I want to be internally quiet but productive, when I want to connect with someone else. How do I regulate? And when you have that tool in your awareness, then you will not only be able to use these skills, but be able to characterize other things that you do. Where is it that you go when you do those things? So that you, so for example, I mostly do university teaching and research, but I have a small practice mostly with business leaders, people who run very large companies. And, you know, one of them will have a presentation coming up and I'll show them how to get into a kind of a command presence where they really, everyone in the room is going to feel them. And several of them have had to say, oh, yeah, right, I recognize this. And even though they recognize it, they wouldn't have known exactly how to get there. Which means that if you're in a demand situation, you hope that the right state is going to show up, but you're never sure. When you know exactly how to self-regulate, then you can kind of parse out what it is you do when you do those things that you do well, and just have that confidence that, okay, we're doing this, this is how we do it.
Thank you. And I had one follow-up question, if it's possible. With regard to the practical application of the skills learned in the course, is the goal of the program not only to be able to self-regulate, but is there a way that this would be supportive for working with clients, or is this more of a self discovery?
Yeah, I think these are very useful for working with clients. Not only because you may be able to share simple techniques, but also because when you regulate your state, you regulate your client's state. When you know where you are, when you co-create connection with your client, they're going to follow you. So there's a way that by regulating your state, you invite the person into a different quality of shared presence. I'm sure you've experienced that. And again, that's one of those things like, wow, today that was really on. But when you know how to self-regulate, it's like to be a professional, you need to not only get there, but you need to get there every time. It's like if you were a performing band, you know, it's like that you had one really great concert out of 3, doesn't cut it. You know, you've got to hit it. You've got to hit the mark every time. So when you're a professional and using your presence in a context that requires you to have those higher level skills, being able to know exactly how you do it so that you can deploy it consistently is a key piece.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. For those of you who are interested and kind of want to know, well, fine, this sounds interesting, but what's it really like? Um, Often I'll have somebody say, well, could you give us just a little sample? The reason I don't do that in these shorter introductions is because there's not only the technique of shifting, but there's also the the process of removing the obstacles. Because sure, many of you have had the experience of you have clear instructions, you do it, but there's just something in the way internally. And part of the process that we do is that we work on those obstacles and show you how to move them out of the way. So that typically takes a little bit more time than the few minutes that we have in one of these sessions. And that's why we have a half-day workshop coming up, I believe, on the 15th of December. Somebody who says, oh, this is really interesting, but I want to know exactly what this is like before I sign up for the whole course. And that's what that opportunity is for. So I'll just give you a little demonstration, however, of what the difference is. So right now, I'm sitting in a particular attentional stance that I typically use for teaching. And if I shift myself, and I come up here and I say, listen, I just really want to share with you folks that we've done research and we've developed processes to be able to self-regulate your attention and to be able to manage your internal states, to be able to focus and quiet your minds, to be able to find a state of relaxation, connect better with other people. We've done EEG research, we've done outcome research, and we're going to show you step by step how to do this process, and I think you'll find it very useful. So you might notice that that felt a little different, and that's how attentional stance works. That is also illustrates the fact that we are always in some attentional stance. The thing is, are we in whatever attentional stance we happen to roll out of bed in that morning, or are we in the one that is optimal for what we're trying to do at this point? So attentional stance impacts not only your internal states, it also affects how you impact other people. It affects your voice, it affects your posture, it affects your sense of connection with others and their sense of connection with you. It affects your ability to read what's going on with another person, to be flexible, to be creative, to be focused. All of those things that we need for pretty much every moment of work and relationship is impacted by what our attentional stance is. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have worked with teenagers.
I have done a little bit of work with teenagers. In the last round, there was one of the participants who works with teenagers in a kind of a second chance high school, and he shared with me that he had a 16-year-old girl come, and he showed her how to shift her internal stance. Just showed her in a few minutes, and she said, "Wow, it's the first time in my life I have felt like I was quiet inside. Teenagers are great to work with. Teenagers get it much more, often much more rapidly, because they're not as ensconced in their narrative selves. They're still closer to the flexibility of childhood.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, for me, one of the opportunities that conventional psychology has created is the fact that everything is analyzed from up here. You know, there is an implicit attentional stance in all of psychology and its research, which has really, it both narrows what has been done, but it also, in doing so, has created opportunities, because there is then the opportunity to explore it from these other places. So, for example, there are, you know, literally hundreds of papers on mindfulness, on vipassana, and so on and so forth. And yet, because nearly all of them kind of situate themselves here and go, well, let's look at that thing over there, uh, rather than actually understanding what that state is, and that it is, you know, how it is constructed, it brings a, it would be like, well, of course, this would never happen, but to have a bunch of male researchers studying what it's like to be a woman and not asking any women. I'm joking, because of course that has happened a lot. But it's like, one of the values of having integral and transpersonal approaches is that we can consider the whole body. We can consider all of experience. So, you know, it's like a lot of the research has looked at, well, what are the words that you use to, you know, let's get a standardized verbiage that you use to say something to people, and then we'll put the electrodes on the head and we'll measure them. But they're missing what happens in the felt self. So what's ironic to me is that when we did this research based on shifting an internal sensation in the felt sense of the body, we got these very powerful correlations, so that each time a person came back to a particular attentional stance, the brain activity was, you know, in 5 out of 8 wave bands, was highly correlated. So essentially, when you do the same, when you shift your internal sensation in the same way, you get a very strong, your ability to manage your cognitive activation is markedly clear. Whereas if you take the tools that psychology usually looks at, which is cognition and behavior, let's say you think the same thing 3 times, you're not going to get the same brain activity. If you do the same behavior 3 times, you're not going to get the same brain activity. But by situating one's internal sensation the same way 3 times, there was very high correlation. So to me, it's ironic that there's all this interest. Well, how do we connect cognition and behavior to the brain activity? Oh, this is really hard. And the piece that seems to be the most effective is the one that's usually overlooked, which is, well, what does it feel like? Because feeling has been, you know, the felt sense. It's kind of like that's the Dalit class of senses. You know, visual, um, thinking, hearing. As long as we're hearing words, you know, those are the ones that are powerful. So feeling, that's that subjective stuff. We're not interested in that. And yet, by situating these skills in the felt sense, not just kind of a vague felt sense, but noticing that we can actually have great precision in the felt sense, just as we can have in words or in thought or in body movement. By situating in the felt sense, we've been able to measure states of consciousness all the way from the subjective experience to the cognitive process to the outcome and to the brain activity. So, in that way, I see this not only as really useful tools, but also opening a door for doing the kind of research that integral and transpersonal approaches are interested in, opening that area of research. I mean, oh yes, Jacqueline.
Yeah. Is there any relationship or any alignment between what you're talking about and EMDR?
Not particularly. There's areas of overlap. So EMDR is using, eye movement essentially to eye movement in the presence of emotionally charged content, internal content, to create a desensitization, to create the ability to get the charge out of something, and then integrate it into one's narrative in a different way. So in the sense that EMDR uses a tool for state shift, there is that, but the state shift tool is in the hands of the practitioner rather than in the hands of the client. So the practitioner.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the practitioner is, typically doing the movement for the person to follow for the eye movement. It's typically not a self-help process. It's not something. It's like it's an intervention that you go for and that you participate in. This is more a self-regulation skill that is designed for you to be able to kind of gain that access for yourself.
Okay. I do EMDR and I also do flash. And so the way you're describing it sounds like, because some of my clients are able to, with using their own flash at times, if they can remember, they can bring themselves down with doing, the movements and the eye blinking. But still, what you're talking about sounds different.
There's a similarity in the sense that we all have almost the identical DNA. And so we have very similar, despite, of course, our many differences, but there's something about, as Thomas Nagel would say, what it's like to be a bat, or in this case, what it's like to be a human, that has some similarities. And so, there are, I think I know people who have gained a lot of benefit from EMDR treatments. And, there are many different modalities that people get benefit from. And of course, related to the transpersonal integral area, these typically involve some tool for state shift, because state shift is a powerful way to promote healing. So in that sense, there is some, there can be overlap between different modalities, because there is that, whether it's guided imagery or hypnosis or whatnot, there is that emphasis on state shift and being able to change one's relationship to held emotions or whatever in that state. So that's the area of similarity. one of the differences here is that this is, for example, something that you could use in any context. You don't need to use a specific, whether you're doing it yourself or having someone else do it, having to use a specific process. It's more like, a little kid, first when they're lying there in the crib, it's like these arms and legs are going around and they don't really know what's going on. It's like, oh, what was that? And after a while they go, oh, that's me. I can control that. And so even as grown-ups, we're sometimes kind of at the mercy of the states that come and go. Like, and we hope the right one's going to show up. And this is like a way to just be able to go, oh, I'm going to raise my hand. Oh, I'm going to put it down. So that it connects you with an innate capacity to self-regulate your states just the way that you self-regulate the locations of your limbs.
Thank you.
All right, well, we are coming to the end of the time. Really appreciate your questions and participation here, coming out on a Saturday night. Could probably think of 3 or 4 other things to do on a Saturday night. So thank you for coming here and sharing this time and sharing your questions. And my invitation is, if you really like to see what this is like, you have to try to the half-day workshop to get a sense of, you can have a direct experience of, oh, that's what it's like, and see if that's something that entices you to sign up with the longer training because you've had a direct experience of, oh yeah, whatever that is, I want some more of that. So wish you all a good evening, and we'll see you sometime in the future.
Thank you very much.
The link is in the chat.
Thank you.
Take care. I'm going to stop recording.
Thank you, Glenn. Bye-bye.